We want to pursue our discussions that we've had and just want to remind you that actually all our talks are more or less in some kind of an order, and they're all available on the archives. And if you have a chance to get in there in the internet, you would be able to kind of review, and for those who missed it could hear it again, could hear it the first time. As we discussed earlier in the previous times and last time, the important thing to understand is what is in the seichel ha'adam, what is in the person's mind. We know what's in a person's heart, how he feels. He feels good, he feels bad. But the mind really is what determines of who he is and what's really valuable to him. And ultimately, as we all experienced, you can have the most pleasant situations and something is missing. And this something that's missing, you can't put a finger on it. But this something that's missing is canceling out all the satisfaction that you can have from the immediate situation. And the reason for that is that it does not make sense, it does not have any value to the mind. The mind is extremely deep, to the point that much of what is going on in our minds, much of our perceptions, we are not even consciously aware of them. We perceive a whole reality much, much deeper than what meets the eye. We perceive it, we relate to it, because in fact, if we really thought that all there is what meets the eye, we would just completely lose any interest. The reason that we are interested and we keep on searching and looking is because we perceive that there is real great value in what we perceive. And that perception is our mind. And the reason we have that perception in our mind is because we have a neshama. Because the mind represents that which the neshama really recognizes, the true value of life. We have discussed in the past that there are different levels in the nefesh hodom, in the different levels in a person's soul and a person's perception. And we discussed several times over these months the concept of what's called seichel anushi, human seichel, which means a seichel that only a human being can relate to. It is the seichel, it is the the perception that a person has just because he's human, which means he is not animal, he is human, and the way he sees things as a human being. This has nothing to do with his perception of godliness or something, so to speak, super world. It's just the way he interprets the world itself. A given phenomenon, there is a difference between how the human being sees it and how an animal sees it. A human being sees it from a perception, from a sense of its purpose, of its value, whereas the animal sees it just from what it is physically, but what it appears to be. But in truth, the human being, the Yid particularly, has even a deeper perception than what's called the human level. And one way that I try always to illustrate this is in the fact that we open up a Chumash, and the first word in the Chumash is Bereshis bara Elokim et hashamayim v'ha'aretz. That in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. These words are mysterious words, because I see a world. I don't see God creating the world, physically speaking. And yet, when you learn these words, they don't shock you. It kind of makes sense. Oh yeah, it just puts a deeper thought, a deeper perception that one already had, it puts it into a framework. It puts it into a simple sentence. It's almost like saying, oh, that's what it meant. That's what I thought about. What does it all mean? Because in fact, there are general inyonim in Torah, and there are more specific inyonim in Torah. But the general inyonim, like the first, let's say that God created the world, this is something which makes sense to most people. Just the statement itself. Not the big philosophers. And the reason it makes sense is because that's how a human being with a soul perceives the world. What does this mean? How does he have this perception? What does it mean to his soul? How does he know where the world came from? To investigate this and discuss it a little bit, I'll deviate a little bit from the question itself, and we'll come back to it. The primary need, intellectual need of a human being, is that his life in general and even his daily activities should have some value. The Gemara says that in Egypt, one way of torture, of suffering, that Yidden were put through in Egypt, the Pasuk says that they were Vayavidu Mitzrayim es b'nei Yisrael b'forech. I'm quoting from the Pasuk. B'forech. So what is b'forech? The word b'forech, I think I mentioned it also in a previous talk. B'forech means that it breaks up the person. like a farech. It simply breaks it up into little bits, like to grind something into shreds, into bits. It breaks them down. And the Gemara says one thing, illustration, what did they do? The well-known mode of human torture, which you think superficially, oh, what's in it? And you see how deeply it goes. That they would tell one person to dig up a ditch in the morning, and then the other person in the evening to throw the earth back. And the next day again, you dig up the ditch, and you go and throw the earth back. You dig up the ditch, and you throw the earth back. So you would think, okay, I got the muscle, I'll dig the ditch. No, that's not sufficient for a human being. I want to know what I accomplished with my effort. If I accomplished nothing, if it's just the work itself, this is a form of torture to a human being. It's not just you've abused him, you didn't use his koiches, you didn't use his abilities beneficially, profitably. It's called abuse of the human being, and it's torture. What kind of torture is it? It's not torture to the body. What do I want? On the contrary, you're exercising. But to the soul, to the mind, it's real torture. There is something in the human being. If the human being were, as may appear very superficially, only concerned about his own comfort, do I have what to eat? Do I have shelter? Can I get away from the rain? Do I have where to sleep? Then how is this torture? You'll dig the ditch and I'll give you food. You throw the earth back and I'll give you food. That should be the perfect thing. You know that a mill, it was called, when they used to grind wheat into flour, there were all kinds of different gimmicks that people have designed in creating that mill, because you have to have energy, you have to have something that should move the stone, the rock, that should grind the wheat. So they had all kinds of, there's water mills, there's windmills, and there was another gimmick that people used. That was that they would have these rocks, and the activation of the rocks was done by a horse. How did the horse activate the rocks? There was a kind of a chain link, and if you moved it in a certain way, this would link into the rock and would move the rock. They would put the horse onto this walker, what today perhaps is what's called the runner, the machine runner, and the horse would walk. The horse would, as far as the horse is concerned, it's walking. Actually, it's standing still. It's just moving this moving sidewalk, and as a result, it was moving. It was grinding the rock. But as far as the horse is concerned, it made no difference whether it's running to a field or it's walking in place. Because that's all it is. Its function is to walk, to run. But a human being, if you put him to walk in place, as we said, this would be mental torture. What is it in this human soul that tells him that this is not work for you? You cannot, I can't tolerate this. What makes it so intolerable?
most jobs in America right now are like that or no? Like repetitive stuff, like
No, no,
on the lower level, McDonald's or customer service jobs.
no,
Or,
no,
no,
no. Because even if it's repetitive, but you
get paid for it.
accomplish. No, you accomplish things.
Oh,
You accomplish things. A taxi driver is driving a car all the time, but he's moving a person from one place to another.
okay.
He's doing something. And that is the satisfaction that he gets. That's the meaning that he has. What is it that he perceives that makes it so imperative? So this itself exists on two levels. We will briefly discuss what we discussed before, what's called the human level, and then there is the higher level which I want to get to. On the human level, it is that person that simply because of his seichel and that he sees beyond the immediate activity. So it has to have some kind of value into his mind, what he is doing. As we discussed many times before, the Inyan from Seichel Anushi, that the human Seichel sees things from a value perspective, not just what the physical object is, but what is its purpose, what is it used for. And as long as it's used for something, he gets reward, he gets a human satisfaction from it. But in truth, it goes much deeper than that. The basis of this additional view is that although that we all see the world with our physical eyes, and then we interpret it with our seichel, and therefore it would be just what we are able to interpret. But in truth, we perceive that the whole world and everything that we see in itself is not self-made. The world does not really represent world. It represents the will of a creator. It is not, the world itself is not the end of the story. Now, not many of us thought of it in those terms. And perhaps none of us thought of it in these terms until we learned the Bereshis Bara Elokim. We never thought of it in those terms. But if we examine the process of our selection in life and how we go through life and what we're looking for, we will see that behind the whole search is actually this type of perception. What is the core of this perception? Normally one would say, if we without this idea, that one would be looking for, if we talk in terms of of human intellectual satisfaction, and he would be looking to be personally successful. Personally successful means that he, like we always say, he has a good education, he has a good job, he's respected, and so forth. He is accomplishing in his job. There's an interesting phenomenon. Almost invariably, when the president is serving in a second term, all the journalists and all the analysts who are trying to analyze what the president is doing are pointing to the following idea. They're saying, the president has in mind posterior. What's history going to say about me? He's concerned about what history is going to say about him. What? Legacy. Now, what's history? What's history to him? If you're talking about after his lifetime, after he's dead, so what kind of experience is this? What does history mean to him? What does legacy mean to him? What does he care what the next generation is going to think of him? If he were just selfish, self-centered, and interested in his personal success, so, he wants to be honored, he wants to be respected, he wants to be successful, so that whatever that people will not spit him in the face, whatever it is. He wants to feel that he is a successful person, an accomplished person, he's proven himself. What does history have to do with it? History is posterity. History is past tense. Clearly, he has a sense that these years, the 8 years of service, or maybe the 80 years of life, these are all things which is limited to my experience. But there is a greater existence than my experience. In other words, he views his own life against the backdrop of a much broader existence, not just his lifetime, but a much broader existence, that which preceded him, that which succeeds him. What's behind that? Why is he interested in that? He's interested in that because if there isn't that which preceded him, and there isn't that which succeeds him, then his own life, no matter what he does and how much he accomplishes, is meaningless. It's meaningful only because it's part of a bigger picture. It's not the immediate reward that he is concerned about. It is the broad picture of all existence. So we see even there, we're not even talking in terms of a Yidden, we're not talking in terms of a person necessarily concerned about Ruchnis. There are good and honest presidents, no question about it, but still we're talking about politics, we're talking about human competition and self-worth and so forth. There is a lot of personal satisfaction involved. Still, one cannot ignore that deeper perception that whatever I do, whatever value there is to it, it has to be against a broader background. It has to be something bigger. Now, coming back closer to us, closer to home. Everyone, we are talking about basically adult people who have had all kinds of background, all kinds of experience prior to this day, and they have a perception, they have a certain idea of what they would like to see in their lives. What's valuable, what they would appreciate, how they would appreciate their lives to be. Although we all know that it doesn't come by itself, we have to work hard to get it, but still we have a perception where we're trying to go. And if we examine that perception, let us say if somebody at this point sees himself as a teacher of children, he wants to teach children. So, teaching of children is an experience. It's a certain type of activity. You get involved with kids, you teach them whatever grade it is, and when they finish your class, this year, they go to the next. Let's say if he were told that you teach these kids, and they pass your exam and they pass your test and they do very well because you were an excellent teacher. But once they finish your class, they forget everything you learned from you. You were a successful teacher. You did everything right. But it so happens that this is the nature of things. That you teach them, it's an experience, it's some kind of a exercise. But L'Peil Mamash, nothing happens. After they finish your year, it's all wiped out. This will take all joy and all interest out of teaching. Even though it has nothing to do with you. Again, we see that there is this broader perception. And we can illustrate this from many, many angles. If anyone, whatever values, whatever dreams a person has, he would readily find that that dream is valuable only if it is something that persists, something that goes beyond himself. People have children, people have families, and they raise their children. And they want to see, quote unquote, they want to see nachas. Anybody knows what the word nachas means? Nachas, you want to see joy, you want to have, so to speak, reciprocal. They see that the children relate well to them, the children are happy and all that. But that's not where it ends. It's not the experience of having children. It's not the experience of raising the children that they're after. It goes much, much, much beyond that. Children, even though we have, so to speak, small minds and narrow views, but still we recognize that this is something which is eternal. This is not just for our experience. This is not just for us. This is eternal. This is building a whole world. And this is the focus that I'd like you to follow, to come with me, and see what in fact is behind this. Why is a person interested in this broader picture? Why is he not satisfied with just being in the here and now? to do something that's challenging and accomplish it. And the simple and clear explanation of that is that we human beings in general, and especially Eden in particular, we were imbued with such an insight. We have such a gift, such depth and wealth and beauty just imbued in us, that we see well beyond that which appears to the eye. We're not blinded. To us, when I see this platform, this is not the end of my sight. I see right through it, and I see, as we say, deep down into the deep, and deep down and deep up into the sky. What is it that we see? What is it? What is beyond it? What we recognize is that this world, that world in general, whatever its limits, whatever it means, but world in general, anything that we can identify and see with our physical eye, is not the end of the story. Is not the beginning of the story. This is not where it began. The reason there is a world is not because there is a world. If we would actually think that there is a world just because there is a world, then we would lose all interest in it. We wouldn't care whether we're successful or not, whether we do better than the next guy or not. It's meaningless. And we wouldn't care, family, no family. It loses all its value. What we see, what we recognize, is that, as I said, the world began way before world. Just as when you see a person reading something, he's not reading it because the book is right in front of him, so he's reading it. He intentionally went, took the book out, and started reading it. Why did he take the book out? Because he wanted something. He wanted to read something that he didn't. That way before he read it, he wanted to know it. So too, the world came into being from a source, with an intended source, with intended to be, way before it came into being. In short, the world was created with a purpose. So that sounds like a philosophical statement. This is our all individual perception. This is what provides value for our daily activity. The reason we wake up in the morning and we want to get up from bed is because we have that perception. That to live in this world is really valuable because it's really something real, purposeful. Not for myself, not for my own gain, but just the experience that being in this world is valuable. There's a purpose, there's a meaning to it. And this includes every human activity. Even to do things which you would think a person does lahavdil, just like an animal. One sleeps, lahavdil, an animal sleeps. One eats, an animal eats. But no, there is no similarity whatsoever. A person can be emaciated, losing weight, that naturally he should be hungry and he should crave for food, and he can't eat. He can't eat. We know this kind of a situation among Islam. Should not, none one of you should know it. Why? Because what's called, he lost chayas, he lost sense of life and value of being, and he can't even eat. He can't do a regular simple activity. That you would think is perfectly natural. He does it without thought. He does it without thought because the thought is there. Because he really senses that life is meaningful, life is worth living. If he didn't sense that life is worth living, he couldn't eat. And you know, unfortunately, in our day and age, actually things have changed in the past couple of decades, but there was a time when the idea of the evolutionary process, that the human being is nothing but an evolution that came from some kind of an electrical reaction, and when children would take this idea seriously, they actually would lose all interest in life. There was an epidemic. You talk about the 50s, the 60s. It was an epidemic of among young children, of complete loss of interest. Because children are very vulnerable. They take you seriously. Once you go a little bit higher, a little bit more adult, you don't take these kind of things seriously. You say, okay, I don't know, I just want to live. But a child, he takes it seriously. And he thinks, okay, this is the truth. And then after a little while, he loses it all. So if we would put this point in perspective, a kind of focusing and define what it is that we have come to identify here, it would be something like this. We follow a simple physical regimen of activity. We get up in the morning, we eat, we study, we learn, we do all kinds of different things. We get tired, we take a rest. Everything seems to be perfectly natural and falling right into place. And when we learn something, we say, oh, I'm learning it because it's going to bring me this benefit, it's going to bring me this benefit. This is what I'm looking for. Behind all of that, and why is anything valuable in a person's life? It is because he recognizes deep down that life is something beyond his own definition. He recognizes that life is greater than what he can define about it. He recognizes that there is an ultimate and a great purpose in life. And he is very happy to participate in it. In other words, it's not the immediate experience that he is after that gives him satisfaction. But it is what he was created for. He recognizes that his life is meaningful and purposeful. He recognizes that he is in this world not by accident. He just happens to be here. He is in this world because he's supposed to be here. How is he supposed to be here? He's supposed to be here because, essentially, to put it into words, essentially the creator of the world wants him to be here. He has a real place in this world. He has a real message, a real mission, a real purpose in being. If he thought for a moment that his life is purposeless, no matter what opportunities he had, he would never be able to come and to be at peace with himself. In other words, the simple principle with which the Torah begins, Bereshis bara Elokim es hashamayim v'ha'aretz, that God created the heavens and the earth, and so forth, and then He created everything else, and then created Odom, and then He relinquished everything in the whole creation to Odom, and said, "You are supposed to rule over this world," and this was given to him by God. The fact that Odom can rule the world is not because he is able to grab everything, but because it was given to him. This principle is primary in every person's thought, every person's awareness. Essentially, this is the meaning of us learning Torah. Because one sits down to learn, and he says, I want to know what life is, and I want to know how to act in my life and how to build my life. What is Shnai Mochazim Betalis, or Hamafkit Eisach Havere Behema Yikelim? How is this going to teach me anything about my life? And how I'm supposed to build my life? What does it mean? Just as it is important, and everybody readily can recognize that it is important for one to know the words Bereshis bara Elokim es hashamayim v'ha'aretz, to put the whole world in perspective, and to know where it's coming from and what its purpose is. That it's a creation, but it wasn't always here. It was an intentional creation. So too, every word in the Torah helps us to recognize, to find in the world itself, find a godly view. So that when you learn anything in the Torah, even if the Torah, even it talks about, how do you say, Amafki, or whatever it may be, it is helping, it is giving us a Torah perspective, a godly perspective on a way of interpreting world with a godly sense. We know that, for instance, we're talking about Hamavkid because everybody knows Hamavkid, so we use that. There are civil courts which are established in every country, in every civilized country there are civil courts. That's really basically one of the 7 mitzvahs that Bnei Noach have. They're obligated to set up courts. And if people have a dispute, they go to the civil court, and the civil court can adjudicate between them. And on what basis is the civil court adjudicating? On the basis of you said, he said. In other words, on the basis of what happened on the surface. What did you tell me? Let us say we're learning Hamavkid. Everybody learned the first Mishnah Hamavkid. So it says over there that if the Shomer Chino chose to pay because he didn't want to swear for what happened, and then the Ganav is found, the Shomer Chino owns, he gets the kefir. And the Gemara discusses how does he get the kefir. How can he possibly get the kefir? The behemoth belongs to the other Otion. The Gemara comes up with the explanation that in fact it's considered nasa. It's considered as if he had actually verbally said to him that if this behemoth will be stolen and you will be willing to pay me without me drawing you to Bezdin, just come with tirza, voluntarily come and pay me, then you own the payment from the moment when I gave you the payment. Right? That's what the Gemara says. And that's how come the kefil is his, because it's considered as if it is the shomer's behemoth that was stolen, not the owner's. Right? Retroactively, he acquires it. Right? I think it's this. So now, let's picture this scenario in a civil court. The shomer let's picture this in the civil court. The shomer comes to the judge and he says that the kefil is mine because it's as if he said to me that if I pay him, he will, the behemoth is mine. That will laugh him in the face. Excuse me, did he say it? Show me the document where he said it. Nothing like this happened. He never said it. In other words, the civil court will not go behind the surface, beyond the surface, and say, well, this is what's going on in his mind deep down. This is what he really would prefer. And that's the meaning of their relationship. He will take it on the face value. Did he say it or he didn't say it? And it's also, so to speak, a court of justice. But is he talking from a true godly perspective? What's going on in a person's mind? What's going on in a person's soul? What is a human being? Nothing. He doesn't touch on it at all. But when we learn it, right, sometimes it may be a little bit difficult to understand. But if you think of it, what is the Mishnah telling us? What is the Gemara telling us? It's nigli. This is not Pnimis Ater, it's not Chassidus. What is it telling us? It's clearly telling us that there are things going on which are valid and hold up in court, in Torah court, that you don't see on the surface. And that when two people make a contract, the contract is not just a surface contract. It's a real commitment between two human beings. And therefore it goes all the way to the depth of what a human being is. And on that basis they make the contract. And on that basis people can interrelate to one another. Because they recognize that this interrelationship is a true interrelationship. It's not just on the surface. So that even from this simple illustration, clearly there is, we can go much deeper into this, but from this simple illustration, you could readily see that in learning even these simple things in the Gemara, eventually this opens up one's mind to be able to look at the world and to see life from a Torah perspective, which is a godly perspective. And again, what does it mean it's a godly perspective? A godly perspective means from the perspective that God is the one who created the world, and that everything in the world has a purpose. And the reason that everything functions in the world is because it has a purpose. It doesn't function on its own because it's here, but because everything is fulfilling its purpose all the time. In our own experience, in our own mitzvahs, there's a very interesting phenomenon. When we come to celebrate a Yom Tov, there are mitzvahs associated with every Yom Tov. Pesach, Shavuos, and Sukkot. Inevitably, invariably, the mitzvah associated with Yom Tov have something to do with eating. So you would ask, eating is a physical activity. I eat on every Monday. On Monday sometimes we fast. On Tuesday. How is eating a mitzvah? But with this background, we can understand clearly that, in fact, eating is a mitzvah. Because if a person did not have the sense that it's a mitzvah, he couldn't eat. I mean mitzvah in a broader sense. Mitzvah in the sense that God created you and you have a purpose, and therefore you should eat and be well and healthy. they couldn't eat. Eating, in fact, is a mitzvah. And every time a person eats to keep himself healthy, he is doing a mitzvah. Because without that perception, he couldn't do it. So, this was a little bit taking you into a heavy discussion, but this is a kind of an introduction to the concept, as I mentioned earlier in the previous talks, that there is what's called Seichel Eleki, which means how we perceive the world and how we understand things with our godly soul, from a godly perspective. With our godly soul, if we do not see that the world was created, we just see the world as being, we couldn't exist. It would be no meaning whatsoever. Just like a human being on the Seichel Anushi level, if there is no human value, he couldn't do it. On the Seichel Eleki level, if there was no godly value, he couldn't do it. And therefore, I want to bring it back to us here. Everyone is here for their varying purpose and reasons. Everyone had a different experience and different perception that brought him here. Say, okay, I have to learn. I'm seeking this. I'm seeking this. Everyone has a different perception of what they're going to accomplish here. And because of that, they are focused in their own direction. Everyone is looking, how am I going to answer my original question by this experience and this experience, by learning here and by being here. We have to understand that even though we have very different, very different definitions of what we're looking for, but there is a great commonality between all of them. That ultimately, if one saw there's any kind of value in Jewish life, no matter from what angle, it is because he perceived the inner heart and the inner soul of Jewish life, and that is the presence of the Creator. Because that's the principle of Jewish life. He perceived that Jewish life does not consist in living in the physical world, per se, living in the physical world for a true and unlimited purpose, for a godly purpose. And this is what he perceived, and therefore, even though, as we said, everybody comes from a different angle, yet the answer to his quest comes from the same source. And this is why it's not necessary. Because people come and say, okay, I'm looking for this. Explain to me this. I'm looking for this. Explain to me this. No, that's not the way it works. Whatever you're looking for, the answer will come automatically if you understand what Yiddishkeit is. You understand what Jewish life is, and what Jewish thought is, what Jewish belief and faith is. Then you will find your own path, your own interest, and answered based on that. So therefore, we all learn the same Chumash, we all learn the same Shulchan Aruch, we all learn the same Gemara, because that's the basis for the answers to any question. We only need the encouragement. We only need the vitality to pursue it in a vigorous way, and this will open our minds, open our hearts, and be able to pursue our lives in a true Jewish and beautiful manner. Okay.
Maybe.
Maybe.
Sure.
Maybe. Sure, it'll be.
That's what I said in English.